A quiet truth we often overlook. We live in a world that celebrates youth. Fast steps, sharp minds, glowing skin, these are the things we applaud. But in the quiet corners of our homes, in the slow-moving lives of our elders, there are truths we rarely pause to see. This is not a story about growing old. It is a story about what it means to keep living, long after the world has stopped watching. It is about the invisible weight many carry as they age, the aches no one asks about, the silence that fills a once busy house, the quiet courage it takes to stay dignified in a world that forgets to slow down. In this journey, we will uncover 10 hidden challenges that many older people face, often without complaint, often without recognition, not to make you feel pity, but to help you feel closer, not to speak for them, but to remind you to ask, to listen, to notice. Because one day we will all walk this road, and the more we understand it now, the softer we can make it, not just for them, but for ourselves and for those we love. So take a breath, slow down, and come with me into the quiet strength, the silent grief, the enduring beauty of growing older. Grow with us, subscribe and stay inspired. 1. The silent loneliness among loved ones. There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from distance, but from sitting at the same table, living under the same roof, and still feeling like your heart is somewhere else entirely. Older people often live among their children and grandchildren, amid laughter, conversation, shared meals, and yet they feel like the last autumn leaf, drifting quietly in the wind unnoticed. It's not that they've been abandoned, but the world around them has changed so quickly, they can no longer keep pace. The stories of the young, the new technologies, the rapid-fire conversations that rush by like waves, they make the elderly feel like they're standing beside a river that no longer includes them. They sit there, smiling, nodding, but inside, a long silence lingers. No one means to make them feel left out, but it's exactly that unintentional distance that hurts the most. Sometimes, even in a house full of voices, they find no one to truly talk to. Not because no one has time, but because no one truly notices anymore. When they speak, the response is a hurried glance, a half-hearted nod, a short answer before eyes return to screens and tasks. And so, they learn silence. They stop asking, they stop interrupting. They slowly step back from conversations where they feel like outsiders. This loneliness doesn't shout, it doesn't blame, it simply settles quietly in the way they stare out at the empty yard, in the soft sigh that slips out at night, in the hands folded gently, with nowhere to go and nothing to do. They still eat, still move, still speak when needed. But deep down, they've quietly stepped out of the rhythm of life around them. This loneliness isn't about the lack of people, it's about the lack of true connection. The elderly remember a time when people sat down together and spoke slowly about small things, when words had weight, when eyes met for longer than a second. Now everything flashes by, and they feel like an old memory, a book placed back on the shelf, left unopened. Loneliness makes no sound, but it wears down the hearts of the elderly. The quietest, most invisible way, the silent physical pain. That the elderly endure pain is often seen as something loud, a scream, a complaint, a cry for help. But for many older people, pain becomes something quiet. It lives beneath the surface, hidden behind a polite smile or a simple, "I'm fine." Not because it isn't real, but because they've grown used to carrying it alone. As the body ages, joints stiffen, bones ache, muscles weaken. The smallest tasks, standing up, walking to the kitchen, getting dressed, can become small battles. Pain is no longer an occasional visitor, it becomes a daily companion. But they rarely talk about it. They don't want to worry their children. They don't want to seem weak. They don't want to be a burden. So they keep it in. They downplay it. It's just a little sore. They delay doctor visits. It'll go away. They learn to live with it, not out of choice, but out of quiet endurance. Over time, this silent suffering takes a toll, not just on the body, but on the heart. Because when pain becomes normal, care becomes harder to ask for. And when one sees your struggle, you start to wonder if it matters. Yet behind every slow movement, every pause before standing, every flinch when lifting a spoon, there is a story the body is telling. A story of strength, of patience, of living through the quiet storms of age with no audience and no applause. We must learn to listen for that silence, because sometimes the deepest pain is not the one that cries out, but the one that waits to be noticed. The fear of becoming a burden to their children. There is a fear that grows quietly with age, not of death, not of sickness, but of being in the way. It is the silent, persistent anxiety of becoming a burden to those they love most. Older adults often carry this fear, not because anyone has told them they are a burden, but because they see the pace of life speeding up around them. Children now have their own children, their own responsibilities, their own battles to fight. Schedules are tighter, days are shorter, and attention is pulled in every direction. And in the middle of all that movement, they, the parents, the grandparents, begin to feel like an added weight on already full shoulders. It starts with small things, needing help getting up, forgetting appointments, taking a little longer to finish a sentence. The quiet guilt creeps in with every sigh from a busy son, every distracted nod from a tired daughter, every postponed visit or quick goodbye. They begin to apologize more. I'm sorry I forgot again. I didn't mean to bother you. You don't have to help if you're too busy. Even when help is offered freely, the internal question remains, am I asking for too much? This fear is not just emotional, it becomes physical. Some elders push themselves beyond their strength just to avoid asking for assistance. They skip medication so they won't be seen as weak. They hide symptoms, downplay pain, and pretend everything is fine. Not because they want to suffer, but because suffering in silence feels easier than feeling like an inconvenience. What they long for is not endless attention, but quiet reassurance. A moment of stillness where they can feel needed, not needy. A gentle reminder that love doesn't expire when roles reverse, that being cared for is not shameful, but simply part of the human cycle. This fear of being a burden shapes how they speak, how they move, how they hold back tears when their bodies don't obey them. It sits behind their smile when they say, I'm fine, even when they're not. It walks beside them in every hallway, in every hesitation, in every silent glance toward those they love. And yet this fear, so quiet, so deeply rooted, often goes unnoticed. 3. The silent battle with memory and cognition. A war without sound, it doesn't come all at once. It begins subtly, a forgotten name here, a misplaced key there. At first, it feels like nothing more than a moment of distraction, something that happens to everyone. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, it begins to grow. The forgetting deepens, the gaps widen. What once was a fleeting lapse becomes a daily visitor. For the elderly, this slow unraveling of memory is not just frustrating, it is terrifying. Imagine waking up in a room that should be familiar, but feels strangely unfamiliar. Imagine staring at someone's face, someone you love, and needing a few long, shameful seconds to remember their name. Imagine reading the same sentence, again and again, knowing you just read it, but not remembering a single word. This is not simply getting old. This is a silent war. Unlike physical ailments, which are visible and acknowledged, cognitive decline hides beneath the surface. There are no casts, no crutches, no scars to explain the struggle. From the outside, everything seems normal, but inside, something vital is slipping away, the very essence of one's identity. What is more precious than memory? It is our history, our relationships, our sense of self. When memory begins to fade, it is not just the past that is lost, it is also the present and the future. A grandmother forgets the name of her firstborn, a husband forgets the wedding day, a teacher forgets the subjects they once taught. And with each lost memory, there is a quiet grief, like a photo album slowly losing its pages. But perhaps the cruelest part of this battle is the awareness. In the early stages, many elderly people are fully conscious of what is happening to them. They know they are forgetting. They feel the struggle to grasp a word, to follow a conversation, to keep track of time. This awareness is a double-edged sword. It allows them to function with effort, but it also fills them with dread. They see the decline. They feel it inching closer day by day. They fear the moment when they will no longer be aware at all, and so they hide it. They learn to smile and nod when they don't understand. They laugh off forgetfulness as just old age. They keep notebooks in their pockets, alarms on their phones, reminders taped to the fridge. These are not simply tools. They are shields, fragile defenses against a growing fog that threatens to consume them. This struggle is rarely talked about. Family members, unsure how to respond, often dismiss it. You're just tired. Everyone forgets sometimes. It's nothing serious. But for the one living inside that fading mind, it is not nothing, it is everything. This is not a plea for pity. It is a quiet request for patience, for understanding, for a slower pace, for the space to forget without shame, to repeat without ridicule, to pause without judgment. Because memory loss is not just about forgetting facts. It's about losing the little things. The way someone takes their tea, the story behind a family photo, the steps of a prayer once known by heart. And each of those things is a thread in the fabric of who they are. As the threads loosen, the person remains. Not just in the memories they lose, but in the dignity they still deserve. This is not the end of a person. It is a chapter, written slowly, sometimes in fragments, sometimes with silence between the lines, but always with worth. Shifting social roles. From center stage to the sidelines, there was a time when they stood at the center of the room. Their voice held weight. Their opinion mattered. Their decisions shaped the course of a family, a business, a community. They were the ones others turned to for advice, for help, for protection. They carried responsibilities not because they had to, but because they were trusted to. But time, ever quiet and unstoppable, changes everything. As the years pass, the roles begin to shift. First subtly, then unmistakably. The one who once led is now guided. The one who once gave orders now waits for instructions. The one who once provided now receives. And though this reversal is natural, a part of life's rhythm, it is never easy. For many elders, this change in social role brings with it a quiet ache. Not because they resent the younger generation taking the lead, but because they feel themselves slowly becoming invisible. Once at the heart of every decision, they now find themselves watching from the periphery. Conversations happen around them, plans are made without them, choices are explained after they've already been finalized. They don't always say anything. They understand the intentions are good. They know their children are trying to help, to make things easier. But inside there is a quiet question. When did my voice stop mattering? It's not about control, it's about dignity. About the feeling of still having something to contribute. Even if it's just a word, a suggestion, a story that could offer a bit of wisdom. But too often, the fast pace of modern life leaves no room for slow voices, no patience for long stories, no space for reflection. And so the elderly recede, not by choice, but by circumstance. This shift is felt deeply during moments that once defined them. The mother who used to cook for 10 now sits quietly while her children order takeout. The father who built the family home now watches someone else repair the roof. The teacher who once stood before classrooms now stares at pages they can no longer teach. The leader becomes the observer. The giver becomes the one who waits. And, yet within them, the memories of purpose remain. They still remember what it felt like to be needed, to be the one people relied on, to be relevant. And while they may not say it out loud, many long for even a small return of that feeling, not out of pride, but out of a quiet yearning for connection, respect, and presence. This shift in role is not wrong. It is part of the life cycle, from rising to leading to letting go, but it is often handled without grace. Society tends to value productivity, youth, speed, and in that rush it forgets the depth that older age brings. The richness of lived experience, the strength it takes to step back without bitterness, the wisdom to accept change without complaint. What the elderly need is not to be put back at the center, but simply not to be erased. They need to feel seen, not just as relics of the past, but as living presences in the now. Quieter, perhaps, but still worthy of space, voice, and recognition. To step aside with dignity is a noble thing, but to be gently invited back in, from time to time, that is an act of love. Dependence on others for even the smallest tasks. There was a time when every movement was effortless. Hands that once built homes, bathed children, typed reports, and cooked meals now tremble when lifting a cup of tea. Legs that walked miles to school, to work, to care for others now hesitate at the first step of a staircase. Eyes that once recognized loved ones from across the street now squint to read the numbers on a phone. The smallest tasks, brushing hair, buttoning a shirt, tying shoelaces, become mountains in disguise. This shift doesn't just challenge the body, it humbles the soul. For an elder who spent decades being independent, who took pride in self-reliance, this quiet dependence on others can be one of the hardest adjustments to accept. To ask for help with what was once second nature feels at times like surrendering a piece of one's identity. They don't want to be trouble, so they wait. They wait to be offered help rather than ask for it. They say, "I'm fine," even when they're not. They struggle with the remote control for 20 minutes instead of calling someone in the next room. They wrestle with a jar lid for too long before quietly setting it aside. Every moment of needing help is another quiet confrontation with the reality that things have changed. This dependency isn't just physical, it's emotional too. They must rely on someone to take them to the doctor, someone to remind them of medication, someone to lift, open, reach, carry. And with every favor asked, there is an internal cost, a mental ledger of all the debts they feel they're accumulating. Even when their loved ones insist, it's no trouble. They can't help but feel the weight of each request. Dignity is not about doing everything alone, but when age strips away the ease of action, preserving dignity becomes an act of quiet courage. It takes strength to say, "Can you help me with this?" It takes grace to accept assistance without shame, and it takes love, real, patient love, from those around them to offer help in ways that uplift rather than diminish. What hurts is not needing help, but being made to feel less because of it. Sometimes it's the little things that sting the most. The sigh of impatience when they move too slowly, the hurried tone when they don't understand something right away, the silent look that says, "You're slowing me down." Those things cut deeper than anyone imagines. Because behind every slow movement is someone who remembers when they were fast. Behind every request is someone who used to do it all. Dependence is not weakness. It is the natural progression of life. And when met with gentleness, it can become a bridge between generations, a sacred space where love is offered not out of obligation, but out of deep respect for all that came before. To hold the arm of someone who once carried you is not just an act of care, it is a full circle. To depend is human, but to be allowed to depend without guilt, without shame, that is what makes aging bearable. 6. The grief of losing lifelong friends and spouses. There is a grief that sits deeper than tears, a quiet, abiding sorrow that accumulates over years, not days. It is not the kind that erupts in cries or breaks down in sudden waves. No, this is the kind of grief that settles in the bones, in the spaces of silence where laughter used to be. It is the grief of losing the people who once walked beside you through life, not just one, but many. As we age, loss becomes a regular visitor. First, it is distant acquaintances, then old classmates, then neighbors, cousins, colleagues. And slowly, almost unbearably, it becomes the people you shared your most intimate years with, your best friend since childhood, the brother you grew up with, the spouse who held your hand through every joy and hardship. The pain is not just in the absence, but in the shrinking circle of shared memory. With each loss, the past becomes a little more distant, because the people who knew the younger version of you, who understood your private jokes, who remembered your first car, your first home, your struggles when money was tight, your laughter when the children were small, they are no longer here to remind you that it all really happened. When a spouse dies after decades together, it is more than the loss of a person. It is the loss of a rhythm, a pattern of daily life. The toothbrush beside yours, the way they folded laundry, the sound of their chair creaking in the next room, the companionship in silence the shared glance at the dinner table, the presence that asked nothing yet meant everything. What remains is not just loneliness but disorientation, as if the world has tilted slightly off balance. For many elderly people, grief becomes layered. They mourn not only the people who are gone, but also the version of themselves that only those people truly knew. They mourn the shared language, the invisible understanding, the comfort of someone who finished their sentences, and often they mourn in silence, because after a certain age, people stop asking. They assume you've adjusted. They assume you're strong. But grief doesn't operate on a schedule. It doesn't disappear after a memorial service. It lingers in the middle of the night when a familiar dream comes, in the quiet of the morning when the coffee is made for one, in the sound of a song, a smell from the kitchen, the touch of old linen. There are also invisible moments of guilt. Why am I still here when they're not? Did I say enough? Was I patient enough near the end? These are the questions the elderly carry, questions with no answers, just echoes. And yet, in all this loss, there is also incredible resilience. 2. Continue living, not merely surviving, but choosing to show up for another day, is a quiet act of bravery. To hold the memories gently without being crushed by them, to smile at a photo even through tears, to love again, even just a new pet, a new plant, a new morning routine, takes profound courage. Grief never leaves, but it can soften, and, for the elderly, what they need most is not advice or distraction, but presence. Someone to sit with them in the remembering, someone to say their loved one's name aloud, someone who doesn't flinch at tears or try to change the subject but simply remains, like the old friends who are no longer here. Because when someone dies, they are not only lost to death, they are lost again each time we are afraid to. Remember them. Let the remembering be soft. Let it be welcome. Let grief take its place, not as a weight to carry alone, but as a thread in the larger tapestry of love. The isolation that comes with retirement. Retirement is often painted as a reward, a long-awaited rest after years of service, a chance to enjoy life, to travel, to relax. And for some it is. But for many, retirement is not a doorway to freedom. It is the beginning of a quiet isolation. For decades, work was more than just a job. It was structure, it was purpose, it was a reason to get up, to dress, to leave the house. It was the gentle rhythm of days, meetings, breaks, tasks, conversations. It was the place where one's skills were valued, where their presence mattered. Even the smallest responsibilities gave meaning to each moment. And then one day it all stops. No emails, no calls, no good mornings by the coffee pot, no familiar voices down the hallway, just silence. At first, the stillness feels like a relief, sleeping in, reading the paper slowly, lingering over breakfast. But over time, the novelty wears off, and the silence becomes something else, not peaceful but hollow. Time begins to stretch, and the hours lose their shape. What many don't realize is that work was also a lifeline to connection. Without it, the days can begin to feel unmoored. Friends who were work friends begin to drift away. Social calendars grow thin. The phone rings less. Invitations become rare. And the retired person, once surrounded by a network of people, now finds themselves looking out the window, wondering how the world has grown so quiet. Isolation is not always loud. It's not always about being completely alone. Often it's about feeling unnecessary, feeling like life is moving on, faster, louder, busier, and you're just watching from the sidelines. There is also a kind of grief that comes with retirement, a grief for one's former self. The man who once led meetings, made deals, managed teams, now struggles to fill his afternoon. The woman who once solved complex problems, trained younger colleagues, ran departments, now wonders if anyone would even ask for her opinion again. This loss of identity is subtle but profound. It's not just about missing work. It's about missing the feeling of being needed. Even in families, this shift is felt. Children are busy, grandchildren grow, life has its pace, and the retired person often doesn't want to bother anyone. So they say I'm fine even when they ache for company. What they need is not pity but presence, not entertainment but inclusion. They don't need to be kept busy. They need to be remembered. A visit, a phone call, a shared meal, a request for advice. These simple gestures carry more weight than we imagine because they remind the elder that they still have something to offer, a story, a smile, a memory, a moment of warmth. Retirement doesn't have to mean fading away. It can be a new chapter, yes, but only if that chapter includes connection. Because even the quietest life deserves to be heard. Even the most seasoned heart still longs to belong. The speed of a world that no longer waits for them. There was a time when the world moved at a human pace. People walked to markets. Letters came by post. Conversations happened face to face. Life, though not always easy, flowed in a rhythm that allowed pauses. For thought, for breath, for being together. But somewhere along the way everything sped up. And now the world hums with urgency. Messages blink, screens flash, deliveries promise same day, and everyone seems to be rushing toward deadlines, toward goals, toward something just beyond reach. For the elderly, this speed can feel like a wave that passed them by, leaving them standing on the shore, blinking at a horizon that no longer includes them. It's not just technology, though, that plays a part. New phones, new apps, new rules, instructions that scroll too fast, interfaces that assume too much. The quiet shame of having to ask again, can you show me how to do this? And then again forgetting and having to ask once more. But even beyond technology, it is the pace of interaction that leaves them behind. People talk faster, walk faster, finish sentences for them, interrupt stories they're trying to recall, tap their foot as they wait for an answer. The world no longer moves with them. It moves around them. And that hurts more than anyone sees because it tells them, not in words, but in tone and tempo, that they are no longer in step with the world. That their way of thinking, speaking, choosing is outdated. That their slowness is not grace but burden. But what the world forgets is this. Wisdom often speaks slowly. It pauses to reflect. It listens before replying. It savors a thought before offering it. The elder's pace is not weakness, and it is depth. It comes from a life lived long, from knowing that not everything needs to be said quickly to be worth hearing. And yet, in this fast world, patience is rare. How often is the elderly person told to just Google it when they don't even know where to start? How often are they waved off when they speak because their words take too long to land? How often do they nod along in silence, pretending to understand simply to avoid feeling left behind? The tragedy is not that they can't keep up. It's that no one slows down to meet them. But kindness can change that. To walk at their pace, even for one afternoon, to sit and listen without checking a phone, to let them finish a story, even if you've already guessed the ending, to teach not with exasperation but with care. These are not small things. They are gifts, because in a world that moves too fast, being slow with someone is an act of love. The elderly do not ask for the world to stop. Only that now and then, someone would pause and remember that slowness is not always a sign of age. Sometimes it is a sign of wisdom, presence, and the sacred unfolding of time. Let us not rush past them, let us walk beside them, and in doing so, perhaps remember how to be fully human again. Thysten 9. The inner conflict between wanting to be strong and needing to be cared for. There is a quiet struggle that lives inside many older hearts, one that no scan can detect, no test can measure. It is the conflict between dignity and dependence, between the fierce desire to remain strong and the growing need to be cared for. On the outside, they may smile and nod. They may say, "I can manage," or "Don't worry about me." But inside, something deeper stirs, a tug-of-war between who they were and who they are becoming. These are people who once stood tall. They carried groceries without a second thought, paid bills, made decisions, cared for children, built careers, helped neighbors. Their strength was unquestioned, physical, mental, emotional. They were the ones others leaned on, the ones who had answers, the ones who handled it. Now, the roles reverse. They forget small things, appointments, dates where they put the keys. They grow unsure on stairs. Their hands shake, their energy dips by afternoon. And suddenly they find themselves being helped, reminded, guided, sometimes even corrected by people they once taught, raised, or led. This shift doesn't happen in one day. It creeps in quietly over years. And with it comes a deep, unspoken tension. They still want to be seen as capable, as clear-headed, as independent. They want to protect the image of themselves that they've carried for decades, proud, sturdy, self-sufficient. Yet the body and mind, once so reliable, now ask for rest, for help, for softness. But asking, or even receiving, help can feel like surrender. Some feel embarrassed by their slowness. Some grow frustrated when they can't do what they once did with ease. Others feel guilt when they see their children adjusting their lives to support them. There is pride in them, yes, but also love. And the last thing they want is to feel like a burden to the people they care about most. So they pretend. They smile when it hurts. They say, "I've eaten," when they haven't. They try to sweep the floor, climb the ladder, carry the heavy bag, not because they should, but because they need to prove to themselves and others that they're still strong. But strength doesn't only live in muscle or memory or speed. Strength also lives in the courage it takes to say, "I need you." It lives in the trust to let someone hold your arm, in the humility to let someone cut your food, in the grace to let yourself be loved, not because you've earned it, but simply because you are worthy of it. For those who care for the elderly, this conflict may not always be visible, but it is there, in the small hesitations, in the quiet apologies, in the way they sometimes resist your help, while silently hoping you won't stop offering it. They are not being stubborn. They are navigating the tender, painful terrain between being who they were and learning to live as they are now. What they need is not to be pushed or fixed or made to feel less. What they need is understanding and patience. To let them hold on to what independence they still can. To step in gently without judgment when help is needed. To remind them softly, consistently, that needing care is not failure. It is part of being human, and there is no shame in being human. Only beauty in walking each other home. The fear of being forgotten. There is a fear that creeps in quietly with age, a fear that is not loud or dramatic, but soft, persistent, and deeply human. It is the fear of being forgotten, not just in name, but in presence. Not just in calendar dates, but in the hearts of those once held dear. As the years stretch on and the world moves faster, the elderly often watch from a distance as life continues without them. Children grow into busy adults. Grandchildren leap into their own lives. Friends pass away. Roles change. Rooms once full of chatter now echo with silence. Holidays become quieter. Phone calls become fewer. And slowly, a question begins to form. In the quiet corners of the heart, am I still remembered? Not just remembered as a date on a family tree or a photograph on a shelf, but remembered for who they truly are, for the stories they told, the laughter they shared, the quiet wisdom they carried in their eyes. There is a particular ache in watching life go on while feeling like you are no longer part of its rhythm. To see others gather while your seat remains empty. To hear of milestones you weren't told. About to send a message and receive no reply. To sense that your absence wouldn't be noticed, or worse, wouldn't matter. This fear doesn't always show itself directly. It might come out as a repeated story, told again and again, not just because they forgot they told it, but because it's a part of themselves they need someone to carry. It might show up in the way they ask questions about people's lives, hoping someone will ask about theirs in return. It might appear in the simple phrase, "I didn't want to bother you." But what they truly want to say is, "Please don't forget me. Please don't let me disappear." They want to know that they still live in the minds and hearts of those they once held close. That the seeds they planted, in love, in care, in sacrifice, weren't scattered and lost, but rooted in someone's memory. Someone who still carries their voice, even in silence. To be forgotten is to be erased slowly while still breathing. But to be remembered, even in small ways, is to be seen, to be honored, to be held. A letter, a visit, a photograph, dusted and repositioned. A voicemail saying, "I was just thinking of you." These are not grand gestures, but to the elderly heart, they are everything. Because they say, "You are still here, you are still loved, you still matter." As we grow older, we all will one day ask the same question. When I am gone, who will remember me? Let us answer that question now, not with promises, but with presence. Let us remember the living while they are still among us. Let us remind them gently and often that they are not invisible, not forgotten. They are remembered and deeply, quietly, gratefully, in the lives they helped shape. Honoring the quiet journey of aging, growing old, is not simply the passing of time. It is the soft unraveling of roles once held tightly. It is the quiet rewriting of identity, moment by moment. It is the graceful and sometimes painful letting go of what was, to make peace with what now is. Across these 10 reflections, we have glimpsed into the unseen corners of aging, the weight of physical pain that doesn't always show on the face, the loneliness that lives in full houses and empty hearts, the grief of watching one's reflection change as memories stretch and bodies slow, the sting of invisibility in a world obsessed with youth, the fading of purpose. After retirement, the confusion in a world that moves too fast, the dignity hidden behind, "I'm fine." The longing to be remembered, not just by name but by soul. These are not just challenges, they are quiet truths, often endured in silence, often misunderstood by those who have not yet walked that path. But behind every wrinkle is a story. Behind every slow step, a lifetime of movement. Behind every forgetful pause, a heart that still remembers what it means to love, to lose, to hope. And so, this is not just a reflection on hardship. It is a call to presence, to slow down, to listen without rushing, to honor, not pity, to see, not overlook, to embrace, not merely assist, because aging is not a flaw in the system of life. It is the fulfillment of it. The elderly are not remnants of a bygone era. They are living libraries, carriers of time, holders of the quiet wisdom that only comes from walking through both the light and the long shadows of life. Let us remember this. Let us speak their names while they are still here to hear them. Let us invite them in, not out of duty, but love. Let us ask their stories, not as curiosity, but as inheritance, because someday we too will age, and when that day comes, we will long not for noise, but for gentle hands, not for applause, but for understanding eyes, not for more time, but for the feeling that we still matter. So today, while we still can, let us give that gift to those who walked before us. Let us honor the quiet journey of aging, not with grand speeches, but with everyday tenderness. Because to grow old is not the end of life. It is its most sacred chapter.